Okay, welcome here. Tonight we have Cecilia Di Bernardi from Grimsö with us, and you will tell us what's on the menu for the Swedish wolves.
Yes.
Something like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I hope you all hear me well in the stream and here in the room. As Maria said, I'm going to talk about diet of wolves in Sweden. And first of all, I want to thank you for this invitation. It's very exciting to be here. I am a postdoc at Grimsö forskningsstation, SLU, so Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences. And this project that I will tell you about has been done within the Scandinavian wolf research project, SKANDULV. But first, I thought it's good to present myself because I come from Italy, I work with wolves in Sweden, what's up? Who am I? So originally I come from Rome, from Italy. Maybe there is a connection with the wolf, who knows? It was written in history, in my small history. And I have a bachelor degree in biology, where for my bachelor thesis I've been working on birded capuchin monkeys in Brazil. I was actually in Rome analyzing data and videos of courtship behavior of capuchin monkeys. And after that, I finally got to go in the field in South America. So I went to Argentina, to actually work as a field research assistant. And I studied for 4 months the anti-predator behavior of black monkeys, black capuchin monkeys, and how these monkeys are warning each other when there is predators from the top or from the ground. And most importantly, if this kind of behavior was transmitted generation by generation, so if the offspring was learning from their parents, basically. After that, I got a master degree in ecology with a master thesis on Arctic fox, so fjällräv. And I was studying the coloration of Arctic foxes, so white foxes and blue foxes, as they're called, and their fitness, so their survival and breeding success, especially in relation of their coloration and on the snow environment around them, and if, for example, white foxes had an advantage in snowy areas because of a camouflage advantage, for example. And after that, for several summers, I've been working as a field technician for the Arctic Fox project in Norway, working in, for example, in Dovrefjell or Hardangervidda, capturing and marking Arctic fox pups. After that, in 2018, by the end of 2018, I got a PhD project that I started at the University of Rome, La Sapienza, in collaboration with the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences, in particular within the Scandinavian wolf research project, SKANDULV. So basically what I want to talk about today is only this last part, as you could imagine from the title of this seminar. And what I want to say is, well, by now you know that I'm speaking in English and not Swedish. I was supposed to say that at the beginning, but the idea is please raise your hands and say your questions during the presentation. We don't have to wait until the end. And also, it's going to be okay also in Swedish. I will get help for translation if you're more comfortable with Swedish. So the focus is going to be wolves and the feeding ecology of wolves and the feeding behavior. So let's think about the feeding behavior of wolves. This is a key component of their ecology, and in particular of their interaction with the environment, with all the species that surround them. And wolves, if we think about wolves, they can predate, so they can kill prey, but they can also scavenge. So they can also feed on resources that they have not killed themselves. And they find available in the surrounding environment. And this can be affected by a wide range of traits, wide range of factors, wide range of things happening around them. And a very important one that is affecting their predation behavior and their feeding behavior, it's the prey, the different traits of their prey. First of all, which prey are available? Again, what's on the menu? There are different abundance in the environment, how easy it is to find them, but also their body condition, their age, their, for example, very importantly, their behavior of the prey, because we know that different prey have different anti-predator behavior. So some prey can be more scary and more dangerous to wolves compared to other prey. Another thing that can affect the feeding behavior of wolves is the traits of the environment. So what's around them again? The habitat they are occurring in, the other competitors, and humans and their activities in the environment. Last but not least, so what we said now, it's the extrinsic traits, so what's around wolves. But could it be that also which wolf you are can actually affect your feeding behavior? Are you maybe gonna scavenge more or scavenge less, depending on who you are? Are you gonna hunt more moose compared to smaller prey like roe deer, depending on how young you are, if you're a male or a female, different aspects. So here come into play the traits of the predator also that can affect the feeding behavior. And it's most of the times it's very complicated to gather this kind of data on the traits of the predators and even more associated with the feeding behavior. But I will walk you through the reasons why the Scandinavian wolf population offered an amazing opportunity to conduct such a study. But few more words, and I'm sure here in this context we are all well aware, but let's just remind us some characteristics of the feeding behavior of wolves. They are generalist, opportunistic predators. They're very flexible. And they are extremely adaptable to new conditions. And we're going to see that a bit in the coming slides. They can prey from small to large prey, and they usually go for ungulates. Ungulate is the main prey of wolves in the different parts of the wolf distribution. And I will not go into detail on, for example, thinking about Europe. You can think of wild boar being the main prey in Italy. You can have red deer in Poland. You have also roe deer in Germany. And here we will get to what's the main prey of wolves in Scandinavia. But you already know that. You don't need me for that. So it's really dependent on the local conditions. There is not a story that can gather them all, but that's the reason why we keep on studying wolves in different environments, because that's going to have effects on their management and on their conservation. But how do we study diet? And I think this is really aligning with what you were saying before, if I understood the Swedish. How do we know things, no? And in this context, there is different ways of studying diet. And what I will do today is that I will go through two main ways, but I was thinking of making a little list, and I wonder if you want to help me. What could be possible ways of studying diet that we know? Maybe one of them could be what we were saying before, that I saw a raised hand, but it's actually you moving the camera. I can go through them. It's just a few, but I mean, very well the use of GPS collared individuals that are captured and collared, and they send GPS locations of where they are, and where multiple locations end up in the same area and make a cluster of points, it means that the wolf has been there for a while. So something must have happened. It could be that they are just resting, but it could also be that they are feeding on a carcass. And this is a typical example of a situation where you see, do people see me pointing at the screen from the live stream? Yes, I will do that. Let's see if this is laser pointer. Okay, so you see this image with the GPS clusters, and here you see, first of all, a GPS cluster is a group of points that are within 200 meters from each other in this kind of field and in this kind of method. And those are the points that are, the clusters that are visited by field personnel to check what actually in this cluster. But also single position can be visited because things can happen also in a single position. And something that I have to also point out, and that there is one position every hour usually, or during summer it can also be one position every half an hour. But here, in this image, you see that we have a central cluster with a lot of positions, and that ended up being indeed a moose that was killed, a calf. And then you also have GPS clusters around this center cluster. And usually that's where wolves are resting, because they're consuming a prey, but they usually don't sleep close to the carcass. Because that can also be, I mean, it's a place to protect, but it can also be a dangerous place. For example, as we saw also in the animation before, bears can come and displace wolves from a carcass. So they go and rest a bit farther away. But let's continue with the methods. Yeah. Ooh, yes. Yes, so someone from the stream was thinking very correct that another idea is collecting poop. And actually, indeed, I will go through, there is actually 2 methods for which we can use wolf scats, predator scats, to study diet. And we're getting there. But actually, one more before that we sometimes tend to forget is the use of isotopes. So stable isotope and stable isotope analysis. Because actually, what we can do is to look at the isotopic composition of different tissues. It can be bones, it can be teeth, hairs, and muscles of the predator to get information on the diet, on the food composition of different predators. And this is because there is a measurement of carbon and nitrogen isotope ratios that can vary depending on the diet. So it can really give us an information on diet. And for nitrogen, for example, the nitrogen ratios vary between terrestrial and marine sources. So that can already give us an idea, for example, for predators that are living on coasts. Now, I think, yes, so now we get to scats. First method with scats is, for example, the fecal analysis of hard remains. So scats are collected, they are dried, and then they are, the different components of the scats are literally opened, and all the hard remains are analyzed with a microscope to identify species or group of species, if it's not possible to go down to the species. Another kind of analysis that is done with scats is the fecal analysis of DNA. So the analysis of prey DNA from predator scats. And this is what I will talk about. But first of all, I want to say that this is within the field of environmental DNA. What is environmental DNA? This is something that is really growing and is used more and more in the monitoring and monitoring of biodiversity. And if you think about environmental DNA, stands for those samples that can be collected from the environment. So can be samples of soil, water. Nowadays, they're even taking samples from air. So air samples. And scats as well. So scats is one of them. And from there, you can understand what kind of DNA we find and therefore what species and communities we find. Importantly, for scats is a very low quantity and quality of DNA, so it's really a meticulous job that can gather results very, at that point, once you manage to find DNA in a scats, then it's a very valuable data that you have in your hands, and I can confirm that. Lastly, it's non-invasive, so we're not interacting with the animals in any way. What we're doing is to going out and collecting scats. And I would say that they know that we are there, so they very likely stay quite away from us. But why is the Scandinavian wolf population so was a perfect case for this kind of study with DNA and with scats to study diet? Well, as you know, I will not go over this too much in detail, but you know, this is the report from the last monitoring season, 23-24, where we had 46 packs and 30 pairs in, as you can see, central southern Sweden and the eastern part of Norway. And this was coming from the 80s from 2 wolves from the Finnish-Russian population that established in central Sweden. And how do we know all this information about these wolves? Well, we know that thanks to the huge work conducted by Länsstyrelsen and the county board that are going out in the field and collecting samples. So this is a long-term monitoring of packs and pairs done through snow tracking and DNA sampling. What comes together with this monitoring, it's also an incredible piece of information that it's been shown here and there, but it's always worth to show again, which is the pedigree of the Scandinavian population since, I should go here, since the founders, so since 1983. And this gives us incredible information, which is the inbreeding coefficient of almost all individuals of the population. And it has been shown in the Scandinavian wolf population, but also in other animals, in other wolf populations, how the inbreeding depression has negative effects on the fitness of individuals, on their survival, on their breeding success. And what was shown for the Scandinavian wolf population is that more inbred wolves had smaller litter size, had a later age at first reproduction, and they had low breeding success, lower pairing success, so probability to find a mate and reproduce. And also, this is a bit a teaser because that is not published yet, but they are seeing how also body weight is different for more inbred wolves. It seems lower. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. That they have also even lower body weights. So what we were also wondering with our study that I will show you, it's if this maybe also has effect on their ability to hunt and on their success of hunting. If they're more inbred, who knows, maybe they have lower conditions. Another big piece of information is the recent expansion southward of the Scandinavian population. As you can see, from 2000 up to 2023, you see how the population expanded both in numbers, in number of territories, but also in geographical expansion eastward and southward, with territories down to Skåne. And with this expansion, there is a very important aspect in the feeding ecology of wolves, because we go through a gradient of different ungulate communities with this expansion southward. Because we start with the moose. Wolves have mostly lived in moose-dominated landscapes. But then when they started expanding south, then roe deer showed up as an alternative smaller prey. And even more, when going south, a new combination of ungulates showed up. So also wild boar, red deer, and fallow deer. So again, what's on the menu? Well, this is what's available. Let's see then what they go for, no? That is not going to be just affected by what's there, but maybe also their behavior, the behavior of the prey, but also the behavior of the predators. But if we look at a map, and here the lighter it is, the lower density, and then the darker color is higher density of the different ungulates, you see for moose quite even distribution, for roe deer higher density of roe deer more south, and for wild boar as well higher density in the south. And both red deer and fallow deer have quite a patchy distribution, so in different patches. And if you overlap these 5 maps, you can imagine the really vast array of different prey communities that wolves have at hand at a very local scale. So they can have a very different menu available depending on where they are in the different parts of Sweden. And the last piece of information is that, as you know, what happens in the autumn here in Scandinavia is the hunt of moose, which is the beginning of the hunt. So this provides a pulse of human-provided carrion in the autumn. So the hunting activity and the slaughter remains that are left in the forest, that's what's available for wolves and for other scavengers. So we wonder if that actually can affect the feeding patterns of wolves. But it's impossible to summarize over several decades of research done by SKANDULV using GPS collar wolves, but I will just bring up bits and pieces to put up a story to share, but all the things I will discuss and even more are available and published in scientific publications, but also a lot it's been published as a popular science publications. And among them, now a little teaser, this is a book that has been written by Grimsö researchers. And this is in name of the 50 years, so the jubileum of Grimsö. And there is a lot of research in, I would say, fairly simple wording in this book. And this includes also a lot about the wolves. So if you are interested, we're going to bring books here, the next talks, if people is interested in having these books. And I will, now see I cannot move, here, if you want to spread, have a look around. Okay, but what do we know so far of diet using this GPS method? So wolves that are colored with GPS and that are predation studies are conducted. And this is a study that we recently published within SKANDULV that is gathering data of GPS studies from 2001 to 19, both in Sweden and Norway. And it includes 82 predation studies, so more than 3,000 study days where field personnel actually went and checked on those GPS clusters. And this is up to 39 GPS color wolves and up to 1,426 carcasses that have been found during these studies. And this goes way beyond when I was born almost. So here I'm really just telling few parts of a very long story that has started a long time ago, actually at the end of the 90s. So the objective of this study that we recently published was to check and to estimate how much wolves are predating or scavenging in Scandinavia, because it really varies a lot. If we think about Italy, where I come from, there is a very high level of scavenging. Wolves are scavenging on carcasses of livestock that are illegally left in the fields, so wolves can find these carcasses and feed on them. And this, as you can imagine, has quite an impact on their role in the ecosystem, because they see that when there is a low density of wild ungulates and wolves are rather scavenging, these can of course have an effect on the wild ungulate populations that are not predated at all by wolves. And what we wanted to do is to estimate the consumption time spent at different food sources. So how much time did they spend in those clusters, no? In those clusters where they either killed and consumed a prey, or that they just found the carcass and consumed the prey. And this is done with clusters, as I was saying before, and it's in this particular study we worked with space-time clusters, and I will not go into detail, it's very technical, but what's important is that we consider both the spatial aspect and the temporal aspect. So these locations were also close to each other in time and space. So what did we find? Overall, across the consumption time, we found, maybe this is a bit small, I hope you can read, but as you can see, the majority of the time spent consuming was on wolf-killed carcasses. So on carcasses that were killed and predated by wolves. And another slice of the cake, which is way smaller, is what we call scavenging in this case, which is carcasses that were, animals that were dead by other cause of death, like starvation, and then wolves went feeding on those carcasses. 5% approximately of carcasses, we say anthropogenic origin, which means either that were road kills, so they had an impact with a car and they died, or that actually are hunting remains, so what I was telling before. And again, here we can distinguish between predation and scavenging of these two parts of the cake. Of the pie, it's not a cake. This is called the pie chart, and that's why we say, but I don't know why I like to say cake. It looks like a cake a little bit. So, if we, let's see if I can go forward. Now, so what is that what is the time spent on wolf-killed carcasses? surprise is mostly ungulates. We call them fresh ungulates because it's ungulates that have been killed during the predation study, so it's a technical term, but it's ungulates. So they spend a lot of time on carcasses of ungulates that they have killed themselves. And also another part of ungulates, so all the green can really show you the big chunk of time spent on wolf-killed ungulates, and this is all the ungulates, which just means that they were killed before the start of the predation study. So they likely come back to these carcasses quite a lot. And then we have smaller proportions, so 1.1% of livestock, 0.2 of other carnivores, that it seems that they actually killed themselves, and it's indeed a very small proportion. There is very few cases of such predation events that are documented with GPS studies, and 7% of small prey, like for example badger. And then for the scavenging is different kind of species, but it's mostly, again, mostly ungulates and some livestock. But let's focus on this scavenging. Something that I found really interesting that we observed in this study is that the proportion of time spent scavenging was actually affected by the season and the kind of wolf you were, in what status you were. Were you a wolf in a pack? And here with pack we mean two wolves or more than two wolves, so it's actually both marking pairs and family groups. And then the light gray, it's wolves that were alone, solitary wolves. And solitary wolves could both be young wolves that were dispersing or old wolves that had lost a partner and they were alone in the territory. So there is a quite range span of experience, if you can think about, and skills that they have developed. But what did we find? We saw that if you focus on the season, we found a higher scavenging during winter. And this is, we predicted a higher scavenging during autumn because of this pulse of biomass from the hunt, but we actually found a higher scavenging during winter, which didn't surprise us because there is many other reasons that can explain this. For example, that animals can be dead by starvation more during winter, and wolves can exploit that, but also maybe carcasses last longer during winter. And also, and this is really just a speculation that should be further investigated because I think it's very interesting and very relevant. We know that the moose hunt starts in the autumn, but it keeps on in the winter. And during the autumn there is this pulse of biomass, but there is also a lot of people in the forest. So who knows that later on in the winter there is still these resources of slaughter remains left in the forest, but there is less human activities. So maybe wolves are actually scavenging more during winter because they still have the resource, but they have less disturbance and less risk of being killed by humans. But this is just a speculation. And also, importantly, we observe for the first time how solitary wolves, and here are shown in gray, had a higher proportion of scavenging compared to wolves that were living together. And this is not surprising. This is what we were expecting. If you're alone, maybe you rather scavenge than go and predate prey and risk and take a risk. But let's look at the other part of the pie, predation. Where I will just briefly summarize what has been done with GPS studies. And most GPS studies are conducted during winter. And it's been observed how moose is the main prey. And I mean, so far, moose has been the main prey available to wolves, so it's not a big surprise. But it really constituted 95% of the composition of prey. And actually, 70% of these moose killed were actually calves from the previous summer. And the interval between kills was approximately 4 days for moose. And for summer, it was observed that moose was still the main prey, 74% of the killed prey, and actually 96% of biomass, because we know it's not only about number of killed animals, it's also about how much biomass you get from those individuals. But now we have 75%, so what's the other part? It was also roe deer, beaver, badger, hare, birds, and one cattle calf. I was reading yesterday again. So, but again, moose, even in the summer, was the main prey, and actually 90%, now even more, 90% of the moose killed were calves. And now it's calves from the summer. So it's calves that are just born, and they start growing. So what's interesting here is that during summer, the interval is much lower. So it's 1.7 days in between intervals instead of 4 days for the winter. And what was observed is that this interval between kills was actually increasing over summer. And if we think why it was increasing over summer, well, we can explain that the calves are actually growing during summer. So the size of the prey is getting bigger. But also, there is also another part of the story, which is the energetic demand of the wolf pups that are growing. So they need more and more food. So here you actually see in this graph what I've just said, so that with time over the summer, with the number of days from 1st of June, there is higher and higher intervals between moose kills. And the last part with the GPS collars is that, as we said, wolves has been expanding from a one prey system, so a moose-dominated area, to a two prey system, where there was moose and roe deer. And roe deer, this smaller alternative prey, we didn't even know it could be so important, because it actually proved to be crucial for the diet of wolves, because as soon as roe deer density increased above 6.5 roe deer per square kilometer available to wolves, this really had a huge impact on the predation of wolves, on moose as well. So roe deer started to become selected over moose. So as soon as roe deer was increasing densities available in the environment, wolves were predating less moose and more roe deer. And roe deer is an alternative smaller prey than moose. So if you want to see it in a boring graph, you can see that on the horizontal axis there is the availability of roe deer in the environment, okay? And then on the vertical axis you have the proportion of roe deer in the kills, so how much roe deer was killed in the wolves. And you see that is a positive relationship. So the more roe deer was available in the environment, the more it was occurring in the wolves' kills. And here you see the opposite, which is telling the same story. So the more roe deer available in the environment, the less moose was killed by wolves. So now we jump into another method, as we said, another method to study diet and feeding ecology that has been developed in this context, in the Scandinavian context, in Grimsö during my PhD, which was a collaboration between University of Rome, La Sapienza, SLU, within the Scandinavian Wolf Research Project, which in the end of 2022 was defended in Rome by me. And why did we develop a method to study wolf diet with scats? Well, what we wanted to do was to integrate what has or had already been studied with GPS collars, but really focus on high spatial distribution, a high number of individuals, and most of all, try really to follow this expansion south, which is tough with collars so far, with GPS collars. So I will be very simple in the way I describe this method, because I can only tell you it took, I think, 2 years to finalize it. So it's been a long journey. But in very few words, this is a method that uses a technology that is nanofluidic SNP genotyping technology, which is used already for the monitoring of the wolves. And they look at the DNA of the wolves. But here we twisted the question and we looked at the DNA of the prey using the same technology. And it sounds a bit magic, but you can do up to 9,000 PCR reactions where DNA is amplified. And how does that work? It's basically there is 96 samples that are reacting together with 96 markers. So each sample is reacting with each marker. And what is a marker? A molecular marker is like a lens that is looking into DNA and is checking for a specific species. So is there moose in this DNA? Yes or no? So in this sample, and I brought, this is used, so it has no more value anymore. This has been already processed in the lab, but I brought the fluidigm chip, which is what we use for analyzing these samples, both with the genetic monitoring of the Scandinavian wolf population and now also for studying diet. And you can spread it around. So here you see we have 96 wells and 96 wells. So it's 96 samples taken from each of these scats, analyzed with 96 markers. But what species did we look for? So we had 18 target species, so we find what we look for, okay? So here we based our search on previous knowledge of wolves, both in Scandinavia and in other parts of Europe, and we looked for 18 species from the wild ungulates, so moose, roe deer, red deer, fallow deer, and wild boar, semi-domestic reindeer, sheep, cattle, and also smaller mammals, forest birds. And we also actually checked for the presence of DNA from other large carnivores, which does not mean necessarily that we thought that wolves were actually feeding, killing lynx, wolverine, bear, and foxes, but we had some hypotheses that we could test by checking for their DNA from wolf scats. And maybe you have some question, who knows, about that. But most importantly, we had markers that were species specific. So basically each marker was asking, is there this species or not? And it was testing it with each of the samples. And here I just made an example here for moose, where you see on the DNA, on the mitochondrial DNA, the cytochrome B gene, we have a base pair for moose, which is that green base pair, thymine adenine, which is unique. So moose has thymine adenine, and all the other species had guanine and cytosine. So that's almost like a diagnostic tool to be able to detect one species and separate it from the other species. Okay, so we worked to develop. We had a final set of 80 molecular markers, and we tested them with feeding trials with captive wolves at Vildriket, the old Järvsö. We fed the wolves with a controlled diet, and we tested if how the method was performing. And here as well, this has also been a long journey of feeding trials, feeding wolves. So for this, I really want to thank all the field personnel of Vildriket and Lina Hjelk, who's cutting chunks of moose, or I don't remember which ungulate was that. But this is also published, so I will share with you the publication. And I will not go into methodological details. I don't know what time is it, but it's we can stick to the exciting parts. So what did we do? Once we developed the method, once we validated the method, what was the next step? Was actually to apply this method to scats collected in Sweden. So what kind of data did we have? We have wolf scats from 2006 to 18 during winter. And winter is a very important aspect of the story, because these are scats collected between October to March. What's happening between October to March in Sweden and Norway? The monitoring of the Scandinavian wolf population. So all these scats have been collected by Länsstyrelsen all over Sweden, and each of these black dots is a scat, so you really see the huge distribution of this sample size, which would have not been possible without the effort of Länsstyrelsen going out and collecting scats. So in a way, you can say that these samples that have been collected for the monitoring had kind of a second life or a second scope, because after looking at which wolf it was, then we looked at what was his diet. So yeah, more than 2,000 wolf scats linked already to more than 600 wolf individuals. So a big part of the job was already done by the monitoring, which was really the bottleneck of the process, to extract the DNA and to do the genotyping and identify the wolf individuals. And on top of that, we looked at diet. And this includes wolves that are solitary, in pairs, and packs. What did we want to study? First of all, there is many things that can be asked, but we went step by step, because it's that's how usually science work. You try not to take the biggest question, but you go step by step to build knowledge upon knowledge. So we examined the factors that were affecting the consumption of moose and roe deer, so this main prey and the alternative smaller prey in Sweden. So which DNA did we find in these more than 2,000 wolf scat samples? And here I also have a little question, if you can guess what is the light blue, so the biggest chunk of the pie, and the second biggest, which is darker blue. Moose? So, as you can imagine, moose was taking most of the DNA detection in the scats, but roe deer as well. But interestingly, as expected, we have a bunch of other detections, especially from red deer, fallow deer, wild boar, reindeer, but also cattle, sheep, smaller mammals, forest birds, and also some, very few, but some detections of other large carnivores, and quite some detection of red foxes. What do you think could be causing all these? I mean, it's still 2.3, so it's not a lot, but what could be causing all these detections by red fox? That's one. And then one more that is really typical of foxes. Yes, so my question is, we see that we have a 2.3% of detections of DNA from foxes in wolf scats, of red foxes. And then I wonder what could be the causes. And you were saying in the public here that one of the causes could be the saliva of the red fox that has been, for example, eating on a dead moose, and then the wolf is eating on top of that and taking the DNA. That's a possibility. What else? What is a typical behavior of red foxes that happens around tracks or scats of wolves? They like to mark. They like to pee on top of the scat to mark the territory, to mark their presence. So we assume, or we expect, we speculate that this is actually DNA coming from the urine of the red fox that has been marking on top of a wolf scat, which makes things complicated sometimes when you have to genotype a wolf, because that means that the DNA is mixed, and then actually it could be that the DNA of the fox is overcoming, and then it's not possible to identify the wolf. Okay, but what did we find in terms of consumption of moose? And here we're focusing on individual traits of wolves, of what I was telling a bit at the very beginning. So the wolf you are might affect the way you, your consumption and your feeding behavior and diet. So here you see on the vertical axis the probability of moose occurrence in scat, which in simple words means the consumption of moose by wolves. And on the horizontal axis you have packs, pairs, and solitary wolves. F&M is female and males. So let's see how this looked like in our scats. So this is how it looks, and I will walk you through it. It seems all quite similar, but it's not, actually. First of all, we could see, if you see the circled bars, that actually solitary wolves, and in particular female solitary wolves, had a lower consumption of moose compared to wolves in pair and pack. And this is what we were saying a little bit before, that maybe solitary individuals are consuming less moose compared to wolves that are living together and able to hunt and successfully kill a moose. But also, the other interesting result here that I want to highlight is the difference between the sexes. So we found a difference between females and males, with females consuming less moose compared to males, but only when solitary. Because when these females and males were together in a pack or in a pair, most of the time they do things together. It also happens that they actually separate and even kill moose separately. That has been documented, but most of the time they work together as a team. So we wouldn't expect a difference between the two sexes, while we could expect a difference between the two sexes when they were alone. So that's what we observed. And another result, I'm picking results. The story is more intricate and more entangled, but I'm picking results that I think can tell a story here in this context. But I'm happy to share the scientific publications and when they're published or those that are already published. Here, another thing that I bring up again is the inbreeding. So the inbreeding coefficient of individuals. And what one can expect is that more inbred wolves may have lower body conditions, may be in worse conditions, maybe lower body size and body weight, which can probably affect their hunting skills and their hunting success. And in this case, what we could see is that the more the wolves were inbred, so the higher inbreeding, the higher consumption of roe deer. And this was, we call it in science a weak effect, a weak tendency, which is already an indication of a behavior and of a pattern in this case. So this could be in line with what we predicted, that more inbred wolves would rather go and hunt a roe deer compared to a moose. But of course, the mechanism behind this should be further investigated. And I think that the study of the effects of inbreeding on, for example, body condition, body weight, body size are really building knowledge to be able to look at these patterns. And then one more thing that we looked with scats was how actually the wild ungulates densities in the environment was affecting what wolves were consuming. So that makes sense, no? So, but that's what I want to highlight is that it's part of a more complex and bigger story. It's not only what you have available, but also who is available and what's their condition and what's their behavior of these different prey species. But what we saw, and this is also, maybe you remember, we also saw it with the GPS studies. We saw that higher roe deer density in the environment meant a lower consumption of moose by wolves. And here we are showing it with the scats, and before I showed it with GPS studies. So the more roe deer is available in the environment to wolves, the less they are consuming moose. And another graph that we saw, a bit similar before with the GPS, but now it's with scats, so it's confirming a previous pattern that had been observed in previous years. The more roe deer available in the environment, the more roe deer is consumed by wolves. So a positive relationship between the availability and the consumption of roe deer by wolves. And another piece of the puzzle that we added with this scat study, compared, for example, to the GPS studies that I showed you before, is the role of alternative ungulate species. So red deer, fallow deer, and wild boar. What happens when wolves move south and they have other ungulates available in the environment? What's going to happen to the consumption of moose and roe deer? And what we could see in this study, which is already the start of a story to investigate, is that the more alternative ungulate available in the environment, the lower consumption both of moose and roe deer. And here it really shows the flexibility of wolf behavior and the adaptability of new environment. But this was not enough. We wanted to know more about what was happening when wolves are expanding south. So that's why we applied to fundings from WWF to delve into southern Sweden and the wolf expansion. So we wanted to study wolf diet from a single prey system, so the moose-dominated system, to multi-prey environments, which were those environments that I showed you before, where if you overlap all those maps, you could really see what very different kind of prey communities were available to wolves. So here we looked at the variation among territories, which is called interterritorial variation in the diet in the context of wolf range expansion. And we did this together with Loan Zumbach, a master student that graduated last winter, and this is her master thesis that's also available online. And picking some parts of her thesis, I would like to show you how we started from the scats that were analyzed during my PhD. And on top of that, thanks to the WWF fundings, we could really focus on south of Sweden. And these were really precious samples collected by Ren Sturesen, but also by Loan, a bit from me. So it was really, most of the works was conducted by Ren Sturesen, and few scats also from us. But really, again, the big work out in the field has been done by the County Administrative Board. And on top of that, now we are actually updating this analysis with the last year, so 23-24 monitoring season. So, and these, I want to highlight that these are preliminary results that we have been working on, and now we're actually further analyzing these results for a scientific publication that we are going to submit together with the master student, Loan Zumbach. So we are talking about SKATs from 2012 to 2022-23, winter, so from October to March. Again, what happens between October to March, we know it by now. So the monitoring of the Scandinavian wolf population in Sweden and Norway. And here, of the more than 1,000 SKATs, we separated them thinking about and looking at the potential prey communities that they could feed on. And you have a moose-dominated, actually moose and roe deer dominated area in purple, and multi-prey with different potential combination of prey available to wolves. And we were targeting wolves in pairs and packs. The objective of the research here was, as I said, examine the interterritorial variation of diet in wolf diet. So how are these different territories differing in their diet, and what's causing all these differences? If there is any difference, we will see very soon. So if we take these big two chunks and we separate central and southern Sweden, what we could see is that the diet in central Sweden, a bit similar to the figure that we saw before, if I'm not wrong. So majority, so up to 60% was dominated by moose and roe deer and other species. But if you go to the south, look at what happens. So moose is way lower, and you also have 3 new components, which is wild boar, 70% of the DNA detection. Fallow deer is the light yellow, and red deer is the orange. So you see how the proportion of these alternative ungulates start to show up in the diet as soon as we look at southern Sweden. Now I will show you a figure that can always look a bit confusing at the beginning, but in few seconds you will get familiar with it. So here is, if we look at the prey composition in wolf SKATs in some territories of all the ones that we analyzed, but we actually took a subsample of territories that had a minimum of SKATs. I think it was a minimum of 20 SKATs to have a sample size to be able to say anything. And this is really for more for a visual purpose, to give us a message, and we have been further analyzing this data to see what is causing this variation. But here, what you can see, we see a few patterns that I think are very interesting. First of all, you see a majority of moose in the more northern territories, and you see more roe deer going south, but you also see more wild boar going east and more fallow deer going south. Okay, and I had some very boring is not the right word, poor Loan. I think they're very interesting, but other graphs, but I don't know how much we're running out of time, and I thought that you can look at those graphs later on from the thesis. But what we have been looking afterwards is, okay, we see all this variation across territories, but how much is the actual menu? Again, the menu, so what's available to the wolves, how much that is affecting this variation? So how much the density of moose, roe deer, red deer, fallow deer, and wild boar is affecting these different patterns. And actually, it's affecting part of this variation. And we were surprised, but also very excited, because it means that there is something else. So there is more to look at. And what we are investigating now, that we think could actually play a role, it's that and that's what we're analyzing furtherward, is that there is other factors, such as, for example, the learning and the experience and the individual preferences that may also be important irrespective of what's available and how much of this and how much of that is available. Okay, so what we're doing now in the ongoing analysis based on this data is to include two aspects that look at experience and learning of wolves, which is the time since territory establishment. It's possible that maybe when they spend more time, more years into a territory, maybe they get used to some prey. I'm thinking about wild boar, for example. It might be scary at the beginning, but you might learn how to hunt it. Or it might be straightforward, because wolves are so adaptable, they are so flexible, they are so opportunistic. So we have these two alternative hypotheses. And also we want to include the ungulate community in the natal territory of the wolves. So wolves are in a territory, let's say there is a marking pair, and they're feeding on a prey. But what did they do when they were young? What did they do when they were in the natal territory together with their parents? Did they learn something? Or they just arrive in a new territory and take what's available? So again, is there a learning and an experience, or is it easy and flexible and adaptable straight away, irrespective of what has learned? And this is both things could be true, and it's difficult to study, but there is more and more studies that are growing on the role of early life experience and how the early life is affecting later stages of life, including for wolves. A last thing that I want to say of another study we're conducting, again funded by WWF, it's a method comparison between these two methods that we have been a bit talking about today, so the GPS method and the DNA method. So we aim at collecting approximately 200 scats during GPS predation studies. So during these intensive studies, where we visit GPS clusters, we are also going to collect scats, and we're going to compare these methods to make them dialogue even more, both in winter and summer, to make a comparison of prey composition. And we have been able to collect scats during one study in 2024 during winter in the Skagedosen wolf territory in Gävleborg County, and we are planning more for 2025, both winter and hopefully summer. So stay tuned. And this is the scientific publications that I have been a bit telling about during this presentation. And also, as I was saying, they're also in the book that is roaming around, in the Grimsö book. And also what I wanted to highlight is the really big interest that this has, that the use of scats and DNA for studying diet has gathered in these years. We have been interviewed by radio, by Naturmorgon, by different programs of the radio, but also showing up a little bit in the TV and also in hunting journals with a lot of interest from different parts. So this really confirms how relevant this is to keep on study diet and feeding behavior, especially when wolves are expanding south and establishing in new territories with new challenges for coexistence. Thank you.
Are there any questions, maybe? Or everything's clear?
We do have one online. If I could borrow the microphone. So we have a question online here that maybe doesn't have as much to do with the wolves' diet as much as experiencing wolves. And that is, do we have any wolves in Uppsala? And where is the closest place to Uppsala that you can see wolves or experience them in the wild? And we'll maybe have more people to answer this question, potentially.
Yeah, you can take it directly.
Take it, Maria.
You will certainly know more than me.
Yeah. Do I need to be in picture? No. Yeah,
Come.
I can jump up
Yes,
with Cecilia.
absolutely. Yes.
The question about where to see wolves is a tricky one. But where to track them, that would be the closest territory is called Siggefora territory. And that's a place where it's possible, if you're lucky, to find tracks. And I can also suggest to join we have 2 tracking tours with Biotopia, and Upplandsstiftelsen. So that's also a little bit of advertisement for that. You will find it on the homepage. And otherwise, Rovdjursföreningen is also a group of people to join if you want to go out tracking. So, but otherwise, it's go for Siggefora. Yeah, anything else? More questions? Okay, don't forget Florarna. It's also a really good spot where we have a couple of wolves. It's not the closest, that's why I said Siggefora. So, but the nature is amazing there. So some mires and real wildlife. I have a question, if I may. You said that there is you could think that it might be that if they are inbred, they go more for the rådjur. And that makes me think of the lynx that likes to feed on rådjur. Then I guess that could also affect like the population of rådjur and could be a bit of a more competition with the lynx, I guess.
Yeah, I would say that. And I mean, that's, I would say that's not only for the more inbred wolves, that's what we saw, but in general, where rådjur densities are increasing, we see that wolves are actually preferring rådjur over moose. So definitely it can be a room for competition between the 2 species, between the 2 predators, the wolf and lynx.
Okay.
I'll ask a question on behalf of some of our dialogue groups, especially in areas down south, Västra Götaland and also down in Skåne. There's a view that when there's a high density of sheep and cattle, but sheep especially, that wolves prefer eating sheep. But on your graphs, the amount of sheep eaten by wolves is very small. Yeah. But do you see any kind of difference as you go south with their preference for particularly sheep?
So one important thing is that this kind of study done with scats it's targeting the winter season. So, and especially when sheep are fenced during winter, there is a lower probability, but of course there is attacks during winter as well. But we haven't seen much difference in the presence of sheep. That's a good point. And one important thing that I would say doesn't come necessarily from this study on scats, but overall it's really what's the density of the wild prey. Because it seems like that when there is high density of wild prey, the attacks on sheep are way lower. The wild prey is the main goal, let's say. So that would be my answer.
I would like to comment about wolf, lynx, and roe deer. It couldn't it be the opposite as well? I mean, a lynx kills a roe deer, but it can't eat it because it's so cold and the meat is frozen, and then it serves carcass for the wolves. Yeah.
Exactly, because I mean, wolves can for sure scavenge on animals that are killed by other predators as well. Yes. But it would also mean some interference at the carcass side, so maybe some kind of competition there. Yeah. So yeah, that could be the case. I don't know much about it.
So, and we have 2 more questions actually online here. First one here is, when wolves prey on wild boar, do they usually go for the young ones?
From Sweden, we don't know, actually, or at least I don't know, I would say. But I mean, what has been observed in other countries, like for example, Italy, yes, it's the piglets. That's a bit the same with moose, which is the calves, the main target. And they say that actually the wild boar mothers are quite scary and quite protective. So that's certainly something to be scared of. And another thing with wild boar is that they actually living in group, they kind of put the young ones, the piglets, in the center to protect from predators. And that's also something we see with many other ungulates living in herds, like for example bisons, as we see in Yellowstone, for example, when wolves are predating bison. You really see how the bison calves are in the center and the adults are really making a circle around them. So yeah, but yeah, to answer the question, yes, it's piglets, the young ones.
And then we have a second question. What about greens, as in non-animals? Have you checked what types of greens and berries are present and in what amounts and proportions?
That's a very good question. And actually in this specific study, using this specific method, we cannot find them because we don't look for them. We haven't developed markers to check for grass or for berries, for example, which could very well be a source of food, especially for young individuals. Has it been observed in other populations, for example, in North America, in Minnesota, in the Voyager National Park, there has been a very interesting study how they show that pups and young wolves are feeding on berries, and we have quite some berries here in Sweden, so it could very well be the case, but it was not the target of this study.
Thank you.
Thank you. And if you have questions later on, you can write to me or get in touch. You know where to find me. In Grimsö.
Okay. Then I guess you will stay around so the people here can ask you questions or Anyway. Thanks for joining tonight, and thank you for coming here to enlighten us on the topic of wolf scats and such things.
Thank you. Thank you very much.